and build an ark. How did Noah build the ark? Well, I appreciated the song service. He is holy. And you know, you were singing early about joining in with the stars in the heavens as they sing. Do you realize that NASA mapped the heavens? I worked pretty closely with some of the people involved with NASA. In fact, we have at the Creation Evidence Museum a part of the shield from Apollo 11, the moon lander, the first landing on the moon. And we have a portion of some of the other hardware from space. We have the documents and the charts used to help get us to moon, the originals that will be on display soon at the Creation Evidence Museum. And I've lectured twice up at NASA on the world's first hyperbaric biosphere, simulating the conditions before the worldwide flood. But NASA wasn't that interested in the worldwide flood. So the topic, and a number of their scientists and engineers met in their main auditorium, and they filmed this and put it in their archives. They were interested in Earth's original ecological conditions. So that's what I talked about. That's another way of saying the world before the flood. But at NASA, they're not that interested in things pertaining to Scripture and to spiritual matters, unfortunately. But there are some very fine Christians in NASA, very fine creationists. Anyhow, back to the idea. NASA mapped the heavens and sent probes past all of our planets. And they found that each of the planets gives off a different sound. And the planets are separated from the sun, each being twice the distance of the preceding planet, from Mercury out all the way to what used to be Pluto, the planet, not a planet anymore, but Pluto, through Jupiter and Mars and Saturn. And they found that they're separated according to the musical scale, the diatonic musical scale, if that means anything to you. And in the world before the flood, there was a canopy above the earth, very thin crystalline canopy. That's what the Scripture describes. That canopy had all of the physical dimensions of a radio receiver. So as you were singing, I was rejoicing. The Bible states in Job chapter 38 that the morning stars sang together. Even the sun has now been found to give off an harmonic, deep boom resonance for a background percussion. Wow. Even the sun. And in the world before the flood, you could pick all of that up because of the physics of that canopy having the characteristics of a radio receiver. The deep pulsars give off radio signals. They're picked up very, very faint signals. Can you imagine living before the flood when all of that would stream in each morning? It would stream at a particular time, probably about an hour, the space of a time unit, because the angle has to be just right, attenuated by the rays of the sun. It has to be just right to pick that up, and afterward, you don't pick it up. That means that every morning, teens, you couldn't sleep in before the flood because the music would just gently soothe you awake. What an incredible world God made. Why don't we have it anymore? Well, we blew it. We're the ones who blew it. Now, would you like to have all of that information in a 2.5-hour series with all the biblical and scientific technical references flown right on the screen? You can have it free of charge. All you have to do is log on to creationevidence.org. Again, creationevidence.org. Now, say that with me, please, all together. Creationevidence.org. That's our website. And until some time ago, we offered books and tapes that I had made and books and tapes that other creation specialists had made with impeccable credentials. And we offered those for an exchange of a contribution. But the Texas State Comptroller's Office decided that that is counted as a sale. So what did we do? Well, that was our primary support, financial support. And you have to pay the light bill, right, preacher? Right. So what did we do? Well, I just keep praying that my navigator will keep rolling, rolling, and rolling. How many miles does it have on it? 400,000. 400,000. About 400,178. 400,178 miles right now. And it's a miracle that's continuing to roll. But that's the hand of God. You have to pray a lot and be in touch with Him. Back to the concept. So we don't offer anything even for an exchange of a contribution. So what do we do? We want to get all that information out. So we put it on our website free of charge. Just log on to creationevidence.org. You'll see a funny looking little guy up there. He's my wife's husband. And you just click on the arrow, and I start talking to you in 3-minute episodes, giving you the details of what's in the moon, the details on creation evidence, consistent with the Bible, the Word of God. Then you look into the archives. Oh, by the way, TBN has all the 500 or so programs that I produced for them over 11 years, archived. So you can get all of those. But you have to listen to them in 30-minute segments. But on creationevidence.org, you can do it in 3-minute segments because nobody can listen to me that long. So in the archives, if you want the model, it's 2.5 hours long, has over 200 biblical and technical references. But it's in 30-minute episodes, so you just click on that. You can download it, copy it, duplicate it, send it to your cousin, show it to your neighbors, free of charge. And then if you want the evidence for creation that talks about the hammer and the finger and the footprints and all of this stuff that the evolutionists try to murder me for, literally, academically, they've done everything possible to destroy every credential I have. So I don't even give my credentials any longer. If you Google my name, you'll find a long list of articles that the atheists have written. You know, if you can't take the message, you destroy the messenger. Yes. So they do everything they can to destroy the messenger. However, I've got news for them. They didn't call me. God called me. So there's no place to stop. And criticism doesn't bother me. I used to start reading that stuff, and about the second time through I thought, I don't read pornography. Why am I reading this stuff? So I don't read it. I don't care what they say. It doesn't matter, because the Lord is the judge. They even have articles stating that I gave myself my degrees. Well, my professors and the universities and the schools I've attended laugh at that and say, wait a minute, he was our primary student. You know, and they have tens of thousands of students, and they, because of the work that I've done, some of them list me as their first student of, first PhD and a doctoral graduate that they recommend. But that's fine. So they just laugh at that stuff too. So don't go to that, or if you go to it, laugh along with me. Instead, go to our website. What is it? creationevidence.org. And when you go there, if you want 6.5 hours, wow, click on Creation in Symphony, the Evidence. And that talks about the evidence, the footprints, the scientific evidence showing they're genuine, the hammer, the finger, and all of those actual artifacts that the evolutionists despise, but we've demonstrated that they are absolutely genuine and they destroy evolutionary theory. Well, enough of that. We want to spend our time praising the Lord, not critiquing those who may not agree with us. The atheists have their right to hold their position. That's fine, because one day they too will give an account. And I'll give an account to this audience. I want to invest in your lives tonight. Do you realize this is the only time in all eternity that I will speak to this particular audience? The preacher may be brave enough to have me back again sometime. but there'll be one or two of you missing. Or there'll be one or two others here that are not here tonight. This is the only time in all eternity I have the opportunity to address this audience. That's a pretty somber concept.
Yes, it is.
So are you ready for a 3-hour message?
Yes, yes.
2 of you said okay, and the rest of you groaned. No, I'll try to keep it a little over an hour if you can listen real fast. Let's bring up the schematic to make sure we're in place, so when we start to run, we're going to talk about building an ark. And I have the laser point. Okay, all right, before talking about building the ark, let's look at this. This is the central display at the Creation Evidence Museum. Over to the right, up here, that you can't see, is the 25-foot scale replica of Noah's Ark in a very long hall going in this direction. We built a 25-foot scale replica after 40 years of research, a solid year working back and forth with a professional draftsman with his computer, working back and forth, then 26 months with 3 master craftsmen. Now, are you awake?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
After completing that ark, I got a call from Hollywood. No, they didn't ask me to star in a movie. No. And I wouldn't have, anyhow. I mean, they're not friend of Christianity, have not demonstrated themselves to be. But I got a call from Hollywood, and they said, we're being funded by DreamWorks. Wow, that's pretty tall cotton, as we say in Texas. And they said, we're not working with Steven Spielberg, but he's a personal friend of the director of a new film that we're producing. I said, okay, watch the film. They said, Finding Noah. Now that's before the film came out about a year ago called Noah, starring Michael Crow. Well, I didn't go to see that. I spend my money driving, eating at McDonald's, and take care of my family, and researching and digging dinosaurs, directing the museum. I don't have, what's it cost to go to the movies these days? Now, boy, that's a loaded question, isn't it? and so I waited until the DVD came out. I went to Walmart. That's America's store, you know. I went to Walmart and bought it. I said Michael Crow is Russell Crowe. That's how much I know about those guys. He's a brilliant actor. But I'll tell you what, that was a piece of trash. Stating it with as much dignity as I can. So I pitched it in the corner and haven't picked it up since then. But they knew this was coming out. So the gentleman on the other end of the line said, sir, and anytime anyone calls me sir, I listen. I don't hear that too often, so I listen. He said, sir, we're a small group of Christians in Hollywood. Well, I didn't know whether or not to believe it. And he said, we're going to produce, riding the crest of the blockbuster Noah, we're going to produce a full-length movie, big screen, going to release it in the theaters, and then as a worldwide documentary called Finding Noah. And he said, we understand that you have built an ark. I said, yes, took 40 years of research. I actually climbed Mount Ararat in search of the ark. I saw one of the small laminated beams of the ark. Oh, really? So he said, we just need 3 hours of your time, and we'll bring in our high-definition cameras. 3 hours every time. I said, that's fine. They came, started filming our replica. 3 days later, they drove out of town. They learned things that they included in the movie, but they were shocked to learn they were credible, and our ark will be the centerpiece of that movie. Well, a few months ago, they called and said the screening will be in Dallas, private screening. So those in the movie, some of my friends and others who climbed Mount Ararat a year ago, I climbed it in 1990, I was a little younger then, Pastor. Climbed Mount Ararat in 1990, and some of my friends climbed it, and the crew climbed it and photographed all of the response, the expectations, etc. Did they find the ark? No, but at the end, in their drilling down, because they had access to ground-penetrating radar, in their drilling, they did find some organic material on the end of the bit. And so the film was 90 minutes. So at the screening, I took my pastor with me. We sat there. All of the documentaries that have been released by Hollywood and all the films released by Hollywood over the last number of decades and generations have started out with something like, there's a marvelous story called The Worldwide Flood and Noah's Ark. Then they talk about Noah and you think, wow, okay, they're our friend. And about 45 minutes into the program, they bring in from the left side one of the liberals, they bring in another, they bring in an atheist, they bring in this professor has his opinion, and by the time the movie is finished, they have destroyed any credibility to the ark whatsoever. That's standard. So that's what I expected. We sat there, got to the middle of the film, and our replica came up. Got about 2 minutes in the film. Oh, that's pretty good. Describing what a cubit is. Describing the technique to build the ark. You see, July the 8th, 2014, after 40 years of research, the United States Patent and Trademark Office issued me a permit on the structural interlamination, not a permit, a patent on structural interlamination concept to build a marine vessel. And the front page of that patent, the face page of that patent, is Noah's Ark. I hold a patent on building Noah's Ark. Well, will it float? Well, it did, because you're in here. We came across that flood. Anyhow, back to the movie. So, kept going. Saw my friends climbing the mountain, and I felt every pain with them. The mountain is called Agreda by the locals. That means, in their language, the painful mountain. Mount Ararat is the largest single mountain mass on planet Earth. There are mountain ranges that are larger and greater in mass. But as a single mountain, it is the largest mountain mass on planet Earth. It is volcanic. It trembles every day, or basically every night when you take time to stop and try to get a little sleep. Try to get a little sleep. It continues to cone. It is now 17,000 feet high.
Wow.
That is a tall mountain. You get little altitude sickness when you climb it. And we had access to ground-penetrating radar from NASA. One of the sites, the ark is broken into at least 4 components and a debris field. And if you come to visit the Creation Evidence Museum, please do. I'll get to it in just a moment, in another 45 minutes or so. If you come to visit the Creation Evidence Museum, you will see a small piece of wood taken off Mount Ararat that is saturated within and without with resin pitch. I'll describe in a moment what we think the ark pitch was and what gopher wood is. Are you ready for all of this?
Yes.
So back to the film. Big screen, I mean, it was masterfully done. In fact, they brought their big cameras, high definition, and they brought their rail system. And I kept waiting for them, Pastor, to cut us off at the knees. I just kept waiting and waiting. More of my friends climbed the mountain, and they gave more details of credibility about the sightings over the centuries, and referred back to our model. And then the screen went black, 90 minutes had passed, credits came up, and it was not destroyed. Isn't that marvelous? So the name of the film will be Finding Noah. And if you want to Google that, no fair doing it during service, just Google findingnoah.com. And you'll see the trailer talking about the film, and it's going to be released in about 6 months. Okay, all of that is introduction, no fair counting time yet. I don't want to put you to sleep tonight. I came to invest in your lives. turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 6, verse number 13. As you're turning, let's go back to the preceding slide. And I want to talk to you for a moment about the interior of the ark, interior of the museum. To the right is the replica of Noah's Ark that you cannot see. To the left is an entire wing dedicated to the proposition that Israel is special, and Israel is very special, and various artifacts, some of them we excavated in Israel, some we got otherwise from Israel, are in the wing over here. You can barely see a portion of a very large steel chamber. It is 62 feet long, 14 feet wide, weighs 92,000 pounds.
Whoa.
That's pretty heavy. We are in the process of building the world's first hyperbaric biosphere right here, and it runs all the way out to this area. The world's first hyperbaric biosphere, I hold a patent on that. It is a simulation of the world before the flood. Now, I do emphasize it is not a duplication of the world before the flood. Now, I'm old, but I'm not old enough to have lived before the flood. So to monitor all the parameters of the world before the flood is impossible, but we do have biblical and scientific data that lead us to a very high degree of understanding of what the world was like originally. For instance, Pastor and I talked today at noon before the family arrived about dinosaurs. I mentioned this morning I've had the privilege of discovering and directing the excavation of 16 different dinosaurs. And my critics never mentioned that. You know, those who, see, I hold 3 doctorates, but I don't mention any of those. Degrees don't matter. But the critics don't mention the good things that are done. So what do? Do you sit down and weep? No. By well-doing, you put to silence the ignorance of foolish men.
That's good. Amen.
You just continue to do all the good you can. Praise the Lord to the best of your ability. And somebody's listening who needs the message you're giving.
Amen.
By the way, while they were doing all of that, my programs were released on TBN for 11 years. Often, the audience was 7 million people.
Wow.
So while the critics had 2 or 3 people listening to their criticism, I was preaching to 7 million people.
Wow.
So you just go ahead and tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may, and one day we will all give an account.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to the concept. In the world before the flood, the dinosaur mystery is solved. You see, what the evolutionary community didn't want to talk much about is the fact that dinosaurs had small rib cages. And until I discovered a few dinosaurs and started excavating in their torso area and talking about it on radio and television, until I did that, they never said anything about it. Then they finally started talking about it and admitting, well, dinosaurs had a very small rib cage, small lung capacity. So the mystery of how they could live in Earth's environment and get enough oxygen to feed the deep cell tissue of their bodies still remains, they said. No, it doesn't. Why don't they watch my videos? I don't think they're going to. In the videos, and on some of the information on our website, if you go on our website, you can download all of that free of charge. And there are at least 10 creation science lessons you can download in digital format and reproduce them and use them in the classroom and send them to your cousin Nellie and whoever you want. Just download them and use them. They're all free of charge. Back to creationevidence.org. So, back to the idea. Among those, and in the series, Creation and Symphony, the model, that's 2.5 hours long. You can download it in 30-minute segments, episodes. I talk about the world before the flood. The pastor and I were talking about that over chicken fried steak today.
Yes, sir.
And as we did so, you see, the diameter of the earth was slightly smaller before the flood. How do we know? Because during the days of Peleg, shortly after the flood, The diameter of the earth increased, the earth expanded, the earth was divided. It was one great Pangean continent, Gondwanaland, for you who studied that in geography, and I think we had a geography professor here this morning. Are you back tonight? Good, 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 good. You know all about Gondwanaland and Pangaea and all of those things. What was it like? What was it like? I mean, were you there? No. I'm just trying to keep the audience awake tonight. Good. All right. In the world before the flood, it was all one great Pangean continent. But the first day of the flood, the physics show that that which was capable of rupturing the fountains of the great deep literally ripped the longest mountain range on planet Earth, 46,000 miles long. It's the mid-oceanic ridge. It's right in the middle of the oceans. It connects all around the globe, but it's subterranean. It's below the surface. 46,000 miles long. And that's what remained of ripping the continents apart. They ripped apart the first day of the flood. And the physics show that the velocity required to do that would send jets of hot water 20 to 70 miles high. You still awake?
Yes.
The canopy, the very thin crystalline canopy above the earth, was approximately 10 miles above the earth. And it would have ripped that apart. And in addition to the waters that were expunged from the fountains of the great deep, that canopy rained down because it was primarily H2O along with other particular elements, and we have a handle on exactly what comprised it. All of that together, meaning the windows of heaven, that canopy literally collapsed and fell as rain because of the fountains of the great deep. All of that together then laid the sedimentary deposits over the entire globe. At Glenrose, the rock shelf, the layer that we work in, called the Cretaceous layer, that layer extends from central Texas near Austin, 1,600 miles to the eastern seaboard, picks up again at the White Cliffs of Dover, runs throughout Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, runs throughout China, runs throughout Saudi Arabia. Wow. That one sedimentary layer. How do you get a sedimentary layer? The only way to get a sedimentary layer is moving water. You can write that down. That's the only way geologists know to get a sedimentary deposit. That's with moving water. So back to this layer. It runs from central Texas. Everything important starts and ends in Texas. I didn't know that your town was the first capital of Texas until tonight. Wow. Okay. It is going to be 3 hours long if I keep chasing rabbits. But okay. Let's see if I can wind this up and get back to the museum, and then to the Ark. All right. So it runs from central Texas to the eastern seaboard, picks up again, runs throughout Europe, Scandinavia, Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, runs throughout China, runs throughout Israel. Our geologists identified it, and Israel's geologists have identified the very same layer, same Cretaceous layer. Runs south throughout Africa, back to Texas. It runs north throughout Canada, runs south throughout Texas, Mexico, Central America, South America, west. It runs west, picks up, is broken up in the Rockies, picks up again, runs throughout Los Angeles, picks up again, runs throughout Australia. It is a worldwide sedimentary deposit. How do you get a worldwide sedimentary deposit of mud that turns to rock? You've got to have a worldwide flood. That's what it took me 20 minutes to tell you. There is evidence for a worldwide flood. Recently, the Dallas Morning News ran a full-page interview article for ICR, the Institute for Creation Research, or after interviewing ICR. And as usual, the article was primarily complimentary, but they always like to get their barbs in. And ICR is comprised of some of the finest scientists alive today, Institute for Creation Research. And yet the secular press gets in their barbs and their criticisms about their credentials. They graduated with PhDs from the finest universities in the world. But a world that refuses to give an account to a creator must destroy the opposition. But that's all right. I know those guys at ICR. They're my personal friends. Didn't destroy them. I just encouraged them. In the course of the interview, the reporter, the journalist, said, Dr. Morris, the president of ICR, Dr. Morris, you say the earth is young, but doesn't the world look old? Dr. Morris said, no, it looks flooded. What a profound statement. If you look at the sedimentary deposits, they're conformal. I mean, one layer upon another upon another. There are no erosional areas. The boundaries are very distinct. One piled on another, on another, on another. As if a flood in various phases came by and laid this sedimentary deposit, laid that sedimentary deposit. There was a worldwide flood. No, the earth doesn't look old. It looks flooded. And that's correct. Okay, back to the museum. So the ark over here, this is the biosphere. How much does it weigh? 92. Very close. How long is it?
62 feet.
Oh, it is 62 feet long, 64 feet long, weighs 92,000 pounds. But we've got very, very close. All right, 11-foot ID diameter. In this, I'll be able to come and go and run experiments along with our staff under those pre-flood conditions. We had a smaller one online for a decade. Are you still awake?
Yes, sir.
NASA was really excited about this. That's one reason I lectured at NASA. We had a small one online for a decade, running all of these parameters of the pre-flood world. That's what got me off chasing this. I was trying to tell you what the pre-flood world was like and how it solved the dinosaur problem. Remember yesterday when I was talking about that? Okay, let's get back to it, because the pastor and I were talking about that. Okay, in the world before the flood, the diameter was smaller. It expanded in the days of Peleg. You take the physics, the same mass, you shrink the diameter, you diminish the diameter. Greater gravitation, the density is greater, the mass is the same, but it gives greater gravitational attraction at sea level. Got that idea? So the world before the flood had greater atmospheric pressure because the mass was the same, but the diameter was slightly smaller. Got that?
Yep.
And with that in mind, today's atmospheric pressure is 14.7 pounds per square inch at sea level. But in the world before the flood, we have calculations to show it was about 22 pounds per square inch. Today we have 21% oxygen. We had about 25% oxygen ratio. You're writing all this down? Or if you just log on to our site, you can get it all free of charge. You don't even have to write. Okay, 25% oxygen, 22 pounds per square inch. Under those special conditions, the entire blood plasma is saturated with oxygen.
Wow.
That is of major significance. You see, the hemoglobin is saturated with 4 oxygen molecules. That's all it can take, is 4. And that's the best we get today. But in the world before the flood, not only was the hemoglobin saturated with oxygen, but the entire blood plasma was saturated with oxygen. That's how the dinosaurs, with their small rib cages, could get oxygen fed to the deep cell tissue of their bodies. And the evolutionists haven't figured it out yet at all. They say, it's an intriguing mystery. Sure it is. But if you'll just read the Bible, you'll find the answer to a lot of problems you won't be able to solve otherwise. And what difference would that make to have 22 pounds per square inch and 25% oxygen? Let me illustrate quickly. My wife is an environmental reactor. That's the reason she's not here. She can't travel with me. She can travel for short trips, and that's all. She's allergic to the motel room. She's allergic to my car. She's allergic to me. She's an environmental reactor. Or at least that's what she says. So anyhow, her health was so compromised I had her to 27 specialists. And finally, Dr. Ray, a different Dr. Ray than I talked about this morning, Dr. Ray said, "You're going to lose your wife. There's nothing more we can do for her." And I said, "Well, I'm doing research on hyperbarics. Can you get her in a hyperbaric medical facility with greater atmospheric pressure and greater oxygen?" He said, "Yeah, but I don't know what good it'll do." Well, we made arrangements, took her to Texas A&M University, where they had a very high-profile, specialized chamber with greater atmospheric pressure and greater oxygen ratio. Here was my wife, had to be wheeled in a wheelchair. She took 22 treatments, and they saved her life. Now, during one of those treatments, as we went in, Dr. Fife, the director of the facility, looked at her and he said, "Martha, what's that on your foot?" She said, "Oh, I just spilled some hot water on it yesterday. It'll be all right." He said, "That's an oozing, open wound."
Ooh.
She said, "I know, but it'll be all right." He said, "We'll take care of it." Oh, really? Do we have a medical doctor here tonight? Do we have a nurse here tonight? Do we have anyone who's ever paid a hospital bill here tonight? What I want to know is, how long does it take for an open wound to heal with a normal person, let alone a person compromised? Any idea? A week at best, 1 to 3 weeks for an open wound, depending on the health of the individual and how deep the wound is. And this was an open, oozing wound. He said, "We'll take care of it." So let's say 1 week. It's actually 10 days to 3 weeks is the normal answer to that. Here was my wife, went in, we closed the hatch, pumped us up to an atmosphere and a half. He put the helmet on her, special helmet just for her, ran an oxygen line. She was getting 100% oxygen. Now, in the world before the flood, you wouldn't get 100% oxygen. You could build up toxicity over a period of time. But for medical procedure, we need a quick fix, you know. So 100% oxygen under an atmosphere and a half of pressure. And once he got that turned on so she could start breathing that and get the deep cell tissues detoxified, he took another oxygen line, ran it past her ankle, took a plastic bag, enveloped the foot that had the open wound, and crimped it and used duct tape to hold it together. You'd be amazed at what medical procedures they do to get you out, you know. Just joking, trying to keep you awake. So, 45 minutes passed. Now, how long does it take, preacher, for an open wound to heal? 10 days to 3 weeks. 45 minutes passed. And my wife tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked through the helmet visor, and she said, "I've had enough oxygen for today." Okay. Dr. Fife knew what she was saying. He reached up and turned the line off, took the helmet off. She smiled. And he reached up and turned the other line off. Knelt down, unpeeled, unwrapped the duct tape in the plastic bag. That open wound was a beautiful, healed pink.
Wow.
In 45 minutes.
Wow.
That's what we're talking about.
Miracle.
A miracle, yes. Now, you can't live under 100% oxygen, but if you lived in the world before the flood, no wonder Methuselah lived so long. No wonder Noah lived so long. No wonder God only had to give him the outline of what to do, if I can ever get to it. The outline of what to do, and Noah just said, okay, and he did it, and it worked, and here we are. So, back to the museum. This is the chamber in which we will have various plants and animals. We're going to grow a Texas watermelon in there. But the door's not big enough to get it out. So we're going to grow Texas watermelon, and we're going to run some very important scientific experiments in there. On this side, various displays, the piece of wood from Mount Ararat, and we're sure that it's from the ark, and you'll understand why in a few moments over here. But in the center, first, that's the largest mastodon ever discovered, the Lone Star mastodon. That's the first replication. That's a replication of the skull of T-Rex fossil. That's the creation model that you'll see if you log on to Creation and Symphony, the model. But that is the big 40-foot chart. Here in the center is a piece of stone quarried under the Temple Mount. Jerusalem quarried in Solomon's quarries, the same rock that was used to build the temple. So we have that. Over here is the hammer, the footprints, the finger. More of them over here. The Meister print at the bottom of the geologic column, a human sandal print. The scientific evidence is right there. Over here is the world's smallest Bible. Over here is a Greek New Testament, 500 years old. And over here, various scrolls, Torahs, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what you will see in the central section when you visit the Creation Evidence Museum. Next slide, please. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. This is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make in the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. And it did.
Yep.
Precious Lord, teach us, we pray, in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
God told Noah to build the ark of gopher wood. What is gopher wood? Well, for generations, biblical scholars and secularists as well have tried to figure out what gopher wood is. And some have suggested, well, it's cypress, white oak, various other candidates. Well, what is it? First of all, the word gopher is not a species or variety of wood. The word gopher in the Hebrew means to house in. And when you place it as an adjective adjacent to wood, it means to configure the wood so that everything in what you're building is housed in with the wood. In other words, it is an engineering technique with the use of wood. And then he said, pitch it within and without. We get the idea that that means waterproof it on the outside and insulate it on the inside. No, no, no. He's still talking about the technique with the structure of the wood, the use of the wood. Pitch it within and without, meaning that you want to use a system of hydrocarbon pitch. What was the pitch? Most people say, well, I know what pitch is. It's the asphalt out here on the highway. No, no, no. That asphalt is post-flood. And aren't you glad God didn't wait till after the flood to tell Noah to build an ark? We wouldn't be here. That kind of pitch, that's hydrocarbon. Asphalt is carbon-32, is a molecule. That hydrocarbon is a result of the flood. That's a result of the expulsion of the fountains of the great deep with the dark swaddling band that you'll find in the 38th chapter of the book of Job. No fair turning there right now because we'll never get this finished. There was a dark swaddling band of insulating material that held the thermal energy so that the furnace before the flood was in the basement, not in the sky. The sun had a different purpose with a canopy before the flood. So the furnace was in the basement. So that each morning, still awake?
Yes.
Each morning as the dews came up, a mist came up and watered all the plants. And that subterranean water was slightly warmer than the surface water. Botanists have found that if you warm the roots of water 3 degrees at least above ambient temperature, The fruitage and the foliage is much greater. Do you realize that before the flood, the vegetation was incredibly luxuriant? Plants like Hopsid club mosses today get 18 inches tall. I was talking to the preacher about these today. But in the fossil record, they got up to 120 feet tall. Everything was gigantic before the flood. Man was somewhat larger. Dinosaurs were much larger than lizards today. But dinosaurs were a separate a separate speciation of reptiles. Okay, back to the idea. So in the world before the flood, you didn't have the asphalt on the surface of the globe that we have today. But pitch is a hydrocarbon. So what are we talking about for the pitch? We're talking about a resin. So if you use a particular resin with a particular variety of wood, it has to be a porous ring hardwood, for those of you taking notes. Porous ring hardwoods are the oaks, the hickories, the mahoganies, not the elms or the ashes or the pines. We built the ark out of mahogany because of its beauty. It looks like a piece of furniture. And the original was beautiful because Ed Davis saw it, eyewitness account, in 1943, and we climbed Mount Ararat in search of it in 1990. And I personally saw one of the laminated beams. So what is gopher? What is gopher wood? It is the use of a porous ring hardwood that's limited to the hickories, the oaks, the mahoganies, the maples. A porous ring hardwood because it has to receive and hold this pitch, this resin. And the reason I got the patent was when my attorney first filed for the patent. It took me 40 years of research to get to that point. The patent office rejected, and they said, "Well, we have lamination patents going back to the mid-1800s, so you're not going to get a patent on this." But then the patent attorney said, "Well, now wait a minute, you didn't read what my client wrote. It is structural interlamination where every component is structurally interlaminated with every other component so that every component of the vessel is adhesed and penetrated by the resin and it becomes one solid unit." Let me show you what gopher is. Put your hands out, please. Put them together like this. Squeeze. Now pull. You've gophered your hands. One solid unit. Stop pulling or they'll grow together. No, they won't grow together. But that's the gopher technique. It is an engineering technique with the use of wood. Then, when you get the right resin, it penetrates and it becomes one solid unit. What was the resin? Well, we think we know. In fact, I mentioned it in the patent, the use of this particular resin. The Neanderthals invented the first superglue. And we get the idea that Neanderthal was a brutish, stoop-shouldered individual with a thick brow, receding hairline, grizzly, stupid, using clubs. Wait a minute. At Neanderthal sites, we found the Magdalenian sketch. In the deposits, they found a little ivory doll to worship. They found the Magdalenian sketch, a girl, a lady, seated with a tam hat, a jacket, a necklace, pantsuits. Wow. Neanderthals? Yes. The largest constructed guild of shops discovered in the ancient world was a Neanderthal site. Did you know that the Neanderthals made star charts? Their contemporaries, the Arygnasian people, made star charts of Orion. The Neanderthals made musical instruments. and they invented the first super glue.
Wow.
Now, what was that super glue? It was birch bark resin. Are you still awake?
Yep.
Birch bark resin is unique among hydrocarbon resins. If you heat it to between 675 and 725 degrees Fahrenheit, only in that 50-degree range. Below, it doesn't catalyze properly. Above, it doesn't catalyze properly. In that narrow range, if you heat it to that range and pour it or dab it adjacent to a porous ring hardwood, it penetrates every cell and every vacuum, every space of that hardwood, and it becomes one solid unit. The Neanderthals learned to take their spear shafts and hack them with the spear points with a dab of that birch bark resin heated to that specific temperature, and it penetrated both the flint and the shaft, so that if anything broke, it would be the spear point or the shaft, not the joint. They invented the first super glue. But I think they had an edge. I think they cheated a little bit. I don't think they invented it. They lived in Europe during the Ice Age, which occurred between 300 and 700 years after the flood. And I think their granddaddy's granddaddy's granddaddy had the knowledge of it because he was on the ark. So they had an edge on what was going on. Either way, they're credited with the world's first superglue. You can Google Neanderthals and superglue. And birch bark resin, chemistry was found in their joints. So, we know what the resin was. It was birch bark resin. So let's see if we can make some progress now on the ark. I'm going to have to, I don't have a clicker with me, so I'm going to have to say again or next and next. This is a sketch of the ark, and the centimeter deposits would have been made under this. Next, please. And yes. How do we think Noah built the ark? Can everybody see from where you're seated? Pastor, if I finish this in 30, 35 minutes, are we still all right?
Anytime you want.
Keep going. Yeah.
All the time. I don't have to drive out till 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. No. Oh, okay. No, I won't do that to you. But I'll try to give you some information next, please. With Noah's pre-flood intelligence, let's talk about his intelligence. Do you realize that before you were born, you lost half your brain? How many realize you were playing with half a deck anyhow? What do you mean? I mean, we have 100 trillion cells in our bodies. We have 100 billion brain cells. But genetically, every one of us produced 200 billion brain cells. But in the third trimester, that child incubating in the mother, by the way, that is a child.
Amen.
That is a child. And all of God's people said, Amen. If God wants to take it home, that's His business. He always knows best. But don't try to cheat. It is still murder to abort.
Yep.
Unless the mother's life is definitely in danger, and that's a choice. Are you with me? And all of God's people said, Amen. I'd say it even if you weren't with me, because that's the absolute truth. That's a child. During the third trimester, that child is growing. And there's a tremendous proliferation of brain cells. I mean, every day, millions of new brain cells. But there's not enough oxygen to go around. Remember, we have lack of atmospheric pressure. Remember, it's all fitting together. We have lack of oxygen ratio. And only the hemoglobin picks up the oxygen. And here's this mother gestating this precious child, this precious mother gestating this precious child. And she's barely getting enough oxygen to go around. And she's having to share that with that kid. And after he's born, she's going to have to share everything with that kid. You know what it takes to raise a kid? all you have and all you are for the rest of your life. But it's worth every bit of it. You want to see my grandkids' pictures? Okay, children are absolutely precious. Here's this precious mother incubating this precious child. There's not enough oxygen to go around. So, in 6 to 10 minutes of oxygen deprivation, a brain cell dies. So in the third trimester, there's an horrific death of brain cells. And they're just flushed out the plumbing. Thank God for the plumbing. Wouldn't you hate to go around the rest of your life after you were born with half your brain dead? God knows what He's doing. And by the way, the sutures of the brain, of the skull, do not form their final configuration until you're a teenager. Did you know that? You mothers know the soft spot of that little baby. Now, why is that? Because God knows the end from the beginning. God's not surprised at anything. He knew what He originally created, and He knew the flood would have to come because man would sin, and He was going to go to Calvary anyhow, and He was going to redeem us anyway. And He knew that things would change so that after the flood, you wouldn't want to be an airhead with all that space up there. So He made it where the final configuration doesn't reach its exact position until you're a teenager. Does that make sense? Yeah. So He knows what He's doing. So here in that third trimester, we lose millions. Altogether, we lose 100 billion brain cells. So we're born with a half of what we genetically produce. So in the world before the flood, how would you like to be born with 200 billion brain cells? With 100 billion, we can measure the distance to the farthest star, weigh the mass of the universe, and interpret the signals from throughout space. All of this with 100 billion. But if you had 200 billion, you wouldn't need computers. You would be a computer. You are already, but you'd be a better computer then. Okay. Well, I got one line almost. Got to the comma. With Noah's pre-flood intelligence, his focus on the purpose God assigned for his life and communication with the Creator Himself, he was able to complete the construction of the ark from the basic instructions we find in Scripture. Next. There's evidence that ships approaching the size of the ark have in fact existed in ancient times. The ancient Greeks built a ship named Syracusia, or Alexandris, that carried around 4,000 tons of cargo. The pre-modern Chinese also built giant wooden ships. The 15th century seagoing junks of the ambassador Sheng Ho approached the size of the ark. Next, please. John Woodmarappy researched those details. Various artists have depicted the ark to reflect the culture and shipbuilding techniques of their day. Won't work. Recently, there was a debate between a leading creationist and a leading atheist. And Ken Ham, my friend, was the creationist who debated for creation. He's building a full-scale replica of Noah's Ark. And I commend him for it. But unfortunately, he is using medieval and modern shipbuilding techniques. I want to show you something in a moment that will show that God overcame that with the engineering technique. So remember that when we get to it. But these depictions are intriguing, but consistently inadequate. Next, please, to survive the 500-foot wave. In Hawaii, they have the story, long after the death of Kilauea, the first man, the world became a wicked, terrible place to live. They got that right. There was one good man left. His name was Nu'u. They almost got his name right. And next, so as they said it was a canoe. That won't work. Next, for sake of time. In China, ancient Chinese writings refer to a violent catastrophe that happened to the earth. They report that the entire land was flooded. They got it right. The water went up to the highest mountains and completely covered all the foothills and the highest mountains as well. One Chinese classic called the Hinking tells the story of Fui. I like that name of Fui. Noah, what's your nickname? Fui. Okay. whom the Chinese considered to be the father of their civilization, and he was, or Noah was, and maybe one of his descendants was. History records that Fui, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. And it wasn't 3 daughters, even though in their culture a daughter-in-law is considered to be a daughter, so I guess they're all right. Next, please, for sake of time. An ancient temple in China has a wall painting that shows Fui's boat in the raging waters. Now, it's a bit narrow, won't work exactly right. Dolphins are swimming around the boat, and a dove with an olive branch in its beak is flying toward it. Looks like they got some good information. Now, why aren't all the stories the same? When you were a teenager, did you ever play gossip?
Yes. Yes.
After you were an adult, did you ever play it for real? You get 10 teenagers together. You whisper something in the ear of one. Did you know that Johnny Fui has a new girlfriend named Chakra? And then you repeat that. And you repeat that. When it gets down to the line, did you know that somebody was shocked when they were ironing their tuxedo last week? I mean, the story just changes altogether.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons God wrote the Bible. He inspired it, word for word, so we wouldn't get it mixed up. Without it, all cultures get it mixed up somewhat. Next, please. The Toltec. Found in the histories of the Toltec Indians of ancient Mexico is a story incredibly accurate. Story of the first world that lasted 1,716 years. Preacher, they got that almost to the year. The world before the flood. 1,716 years and was destroyed by a great flood that covered even the highest mountains. Wow. This is extra biblical. Their story tells of a few men who escaped the destruction in a telepathikali, or something like that, which means a closed chest. Well, they got that right. If you use the structural interlamination technique, it is a closed chest with the right window ventilating system and a door to enter. Wow. Following the great flood, these men began to multiply and built a high zikoli, and that would have been the equivalent of a ziggurat in the Middle Eastern area, or a great tower, to provide a safe place if the world were destroyed again. However, the languages became confused. Ever read that in the book? So different language groups wandered to other parts of the world. The Toltec claim they started as a family of 7 friends and their wives who spoke the same language. Next, please. They crossed great waters, lived in caves, and wandered 104 years till they came to Huejutlapan, southern Mexico. The story reports that this was 520 years after the Great Flood. And I think they've got it almost to the year. Wow, some people tell the truth better than others. Next. Babylonia. Other than the record found in the Bible, the most ancient account of the Great Flood in the Bible was first. The most ancient account of the Great Flood, also called the Deluge, is a tablet inscription found in Babylonia. The tablet referred to an older tablet from which this was copied, but only fragments have been found of that older copy, which was handed down from a previous king of Babylonia. Next. Because many people lived several hundred years at that time, the account of the flood could easily have been reported by someone like King Amraphel, Genesis 14:1, who was one of the early kings of Babylon after the flood. Wow, the story begins to dovetail. Next. Atrahasis, next, please. That's cuneiform. And, okay, next. And next, for sake of time. Artist depictions of the construction of Noah's Ark around 1493. Well, that little Mediterranean and medieval boat has some interesting details. It's got a window here. It's got a deck and people building and 3 basic levels and a dove with an olive branch. Interesting, but that wouldn't carry the dinosaurs and everything else that needed to be on the ark. Next. That was interesting. They made a stab at it. Athanasius Kircher, 1600, was careful to follow the Bible's instructions and used a rectilinear hull based on the dimensions of Genesis 6:15, including 3 decks, a door, and a side, and a window for 1 cubit. So he basically got it right, but more about the window in a moment. Next, please. This is a photo from the Ahora Gorge. That's Mount Ararat. The top is way up there. This is the Ahora Gorge. This is one of the sections of wood with a central window system, broken area. And the section goes like that, is divided into 3 levels. And then because of the earthquakes and the violence and the avalanches, that is now covered over. This is a small model of Noah's Ark with a window system on top that we'll talk about in a moment, placed beside that to show that all indications are that's one of the sections of Noah's Ark, but it's now covered over. Next. This is the advanced expeditionary team. I personally negotiated the permit for us to climb Mount Ararat and for us to perform helicopter sortie expeditions with a Russian-built helicopter. Why didn't we use a V-12 or Sikorsky Black Hawk? Would have been much better. It wouldn't let them in. We had to use what the Russians would permit because Glasnost and Perestroika was not in effect at that time. That's Don Shockey, who was the leader at that time. Then I became co-director. That's Bob Summers, the world-famous artist who sculpted the John Wayne, the Byron Nelson, the Trail Drive downtown Dallas. I have no idea who that fellow in the center is. His hair is the wrong color. He's not fat enough. But that's my wife's husband. I'm going to have to talk to her about that. Next, please. Here's the entire crew. That's the big Mi-8 Russian-built helicopter. That's the only one the Russians would permit. There I am with Yuri at the front and Dr. Shockey and Bob. That's the whole team. And we flew 11 separate helicopter sortie expeditions next. That's the 1990 team. That's Yuri, the pilot, who had flown Brezhnev and Gorbachev. We're exchanging time class. He still has mine, I still have his. It's part of his crew behind it. Next. This is the Tenderich Derupenar site. This is the Ron Wyatt site. Ron Wyatt was a good man. I knew him personally. He claimed that this was Noah's Ark. Unfortunately, this is on Lesser Ararat. Our team took this photo. We did a lot of surveillance. What this actually is a Tamerlane fortress dating to the 13th century. In the 13th century, Tamerlane, called by them Timurlenk by the Persians, but the British called him Tamerlane, so that's what we called him. He built fortresses that were about 550 feet long. He shored them up on the sides with wood, used iron pegs and iron bands or steel bands to run across to the other side and fill that in. And that was for his soldiers. And the bottom section of it is for the soldiers to march in and out. Here is part of the corral for his horses, running there, and all the way back there. And over here is another one, a smaller one, just like it. He didn't have a dinghy boat to go with the ark. Well, what is that smaller one just like it? And that was the fortress for his harem. He took his harem with him. Next, please. Many good people have called that the ark, but it isn't. Now, this is a very important photograph. This is a deep crevasse. The team last year that climbed Mount Ararat could not access this area. It was too dangerous. So they went to another area near the top. If we can trust our United States ground-penetrating radar, and we can from NASA, this is shown as a wooden object that runs right about there and back, is broken there. It is barge-like across the end. It's a series of steps running down, a part of a window system starting there, one of the openings. That window system runs all the way across. If you read closely, the scripture says, make a window above, not just on top, above the whole structure. And the openings of that window are to be a cubit. How long is a cubit?
Foot and a half.
What's that?
Foot and a half.
Foot and a half, that's what we normally consider to be an English cubit, or 18 inches. However, the cubit in ancient times, from Babylonia through Egypt, the cubit was often considered to be the length from the elbow to the index finger of a reigning monarch, or the length of his firstborn male child, whichever was longer. Every reigning monarch wanted the biggest cubit. But the Egyptians were influenced by Israel, by the Israelis. Jacob's descendants did them a lot more good than Egypt did for Jacob and his descendants. The royal cubit went up to 26 inches. So the cubit ranged from 18 inches to 26 inches. However, the royal Egyptian cubit was 20.6 inches. And amazingly, that is a divided factor of the circumference of planet Earth. So it looks like there's a lot of credence to show that the cubit was 20.6 inches, about that long. Did you learn anything tonight?
Yes.
Okay, let's keep going. Preacher, we're doing all right on time
Oh, yeah.
so far? Okay. And what you see there is an icicle dropping off the keel stem. There was a keel under the ark and the stem that ran up. Okay, let's go further. Next. This is the same thing from a different shot from our helicopter. And you can see that it runs from there across there. Something is holding that ice bridge in place, or that ice formation in place, where it is thawed there and is thawed there. Next. Here's another. Haven't learned anything new. Next, please.
So you saw this?
Oh, yes. Those are our photographs. And I saw this. I sketched this. This was a piece of laminated wood. It was laminated, sticking slightly diagonally out of the ice and snow at the debris site that our satellite information picked up 800 feet below that site. And we'll see that in just a moment. And this was laminated together. This was about 4 feet thick, about 1 meter wide, and we're just looking at it this side view here, and about 12 feet long. Next. This is Alfred Lee, who in 1968 was a part of the search expeditionary team that was able to retrieve some of the wood from the debris field. That's a piece of wood that he personally carried off Mount Ararat, saturated within and without with pitch, and we have that on permanent loan to the museum. You can see that piece of wood from, we believe, from Noah's Ark. We can't say it's from Noah's Ark because we didn't peel it off Noah's Ark. Couldn't peel it off Noah's Ark because everything was structurally interlaminated. Next. That was a violent eruption. Next. That's a painting that Alfred Lee did. Eyewitness accounts, 1904, 1906, an Armenian boy named George Hagopian was taken up. For sake of time, let's go on. George Hagopian saw it, 1904, 1906. Painting by Alfred Lee after the description of George Hagopian. That's George Hagopian's likeness being painted. The steps, he didn't show the steps in that configuration. They're solid, not configured like that. And that's the uncle represented standing on a pile of rocks to lift him up. And that's a part of the window system above. And that's what he saw personally. Others have seen the same thing. Ed Davis. Next. This is a painting by R. Steve Miller of what the ark looked like. Next. Eyewitness accounts. Next. Ed Davis drew this for us. He saw the end of the ark in 1943. He was taken up there. And that was debris. And the ark was broken there. The other portion of the broken ark is down here. It's into 4 components now. At least 4. That's a part of the living quarters and the 3 decks, and that's a part of the keel. Next. This is a painting we had commissioned of Ed Davis. Ed's now with the Lord, with a Baugh showing him the details. That's a crevasse they tried to get across, but couldn't. But he was able, with his binoculars, to see the broken components, even material inside the 3 rooms, the window system along the top, and a portion of the ark that had slid down the mountain. It's a violent mountain, Agredal, the painful mountain. And the other end of that is what we're looking at in our photographs. Next. More from Ed Davis. That's the mountain covered, and that's part of the drawing. Next. It's Mount Ararat, the painful mountain, biblical account. We read 300 cubits, 50 cubits, and 30 cubits in the window. Next, please. Lower, second, and third stories. We read that. Ed Davis, gopher wood. I've explained what gopher wood. It's an engineering technique to house in with the use of wood. Next. And eyewitness accounts. Next. Now, this is vitally important. Early in the description, where God told Noah what to do, he said, rooms you're to put in the ark and pitch it within and without with pitch. You're learning Hebrew, Mrs. Preacher, right? You will learn as you go along that in Hebrew, the first mention is dominant. That's very important. The aleph, the A, is dominant throughout the entire alphabet, the alphabet. It is dominant. It's the strong oxen, the master, the male figure that represents originally the likeness of God being dominant over all we do. First mention is dominant. So in the description in the Hebrew, when God told Noah how to build the ark, early in that description, he said put rooms in it. Dividers. Dividers. In our language, that means bulkheads. You get on an airplane, a number of aeronautical engineers and marine engineers have come to see our replica of the ark, and once they see the bulkheads, they say, that's the reason you could hold it together. That's the reason for the stability. Anyone here in marine engineering? We have a marine engineer here. Structural engineer? Okay. We can build huge battleships, huge cargo ships, huge oceanic vessels, as long, we can make them out of steel, as long as we put enough bulkheads together in them. The bulkhead is the divider that reaches all the way to the hull, to the levels, to the divisions, and it holds it all together as one unit. You get on an airplane, you walk through the door, you turn right because there's another door, and you're passing a panel. You say, oh, well, that's just a panel to keep the refreshments from the people. No. Look closely. That's a bulkhead. It's attached to the hull, to the floor, and actually underneath. It's attached in ribs to the bottom. You go about, if it's an intercontinental flight, you go about 30 feet past first class. Always past first class. It costs you extra money if you sit there. Past first class, you walk through another door. Look closely next time. That other door is attached to the ceiling. That is the bulkhead, the divider is. If it's a big plane, you go about 30 more feet, and you find 2 of them in the middle of the plane. You say, oh, that's where they had to put the restrooms. Well, yeah, it's nice to put them there, but that's a part of the engineering technique. The bulkheads, you can make it long and slim if you want to, or wide if you want to, as long as you have enough bulkheads. So, the room dividers are keys, and the pitch is not the tar. We've already talked about that. Next. Let's get a few more ideas and wrap this up. Studies were done at Daejeon, South Korea, to show that the 6-to-1 ratio is the perfect ratio for endurance, for comfort, for survivability, for integrity of a marine vessel. God knew what he was doing when he gave the 300 cubits and the 50 and the 30 cubits. That's a 6-to-1 ratio. Next. God knows all things, the end from the beginning. That's that ratio emphasized. Next. Here we had 20.5 inches, but it's 20.6 inches. The window, next please. We've talked about that window. Let's get to some pertinent details. The stories, now, those stories could have been divided and subdivided for more room, more surface space. Next. Next, schematics of what the ark probably looked like. Next, and next, and next, and next. And here we are building this with structural interlamination. This is a close-up of our window system. Next, here we are building it from one level to the next, and all of this is structurally interlaminated. Next, we're building an ark. Oh, the reservoirs. Let's stop here for a moment. Well, let's go forward and see a photograph, and then we'll come back. Forward, next, and next. Those are the water reservoirs. Next, fitting the animals, and next, and next. Well, apparently I don't have a picture. Okay, let's just stop right there. Let's go back to the reservoirs for a moment, please. Back and back and back. And they're all right. Hey, you just pushed the right button. Way to go. Way to go. How did we know how to build the water reservoirs? Where I saw that laminated beam at the debris field, we examined our photos. We had to fly very fast to stay aloft. And it is recommended that you stay aloft if you're flying over Mount Ararat. But fly very fast. There were some curvatures and huge cistern-like design made of wood, covered with ice and snow, and some of the ramps, but the curvature was puzzling. When we got off Ararat and went back to Ankara and met with our sponsor, we had to have a Turkish citizen as sponsor. You still awake out there?
Yeah.
I'll finish this up in a few moments. When we got back and sat down with him, I said, I want to tell you what I saw at the debris field. I described this laminated beam. He didn't say a word. Used an extra key, opened a separate drawer in his desk. He said, no one has seen this for 20 years. He pulled it out and he said, this is what I saw. I was telling the preacher about this today at noon. He said, I was at that spot 20 years ago, and the thaw was extensive. That is a huge pile of wood. It's wood. And he said the thing that surprised me was the curvature of some of that wood. So that site is a debris field from the ark. We got back and started analyzing this. And those are cisterns, water reservoirs. We built 4 inside the ark, our replica of the ark. Here are 2 of them. One there, one here. There were probably 6 of them because you would need 2 in the middle. We should have added 2 in the middle, but this is at one end and the other end. Now notice how they bulge. It's the curvature of that wood that puzzled our sponsor and puzzled us for decades until it finally dawned. That's the shape of an egg, and that's about 45 feet tall. An egg is the most perfect envelope in biological nature. An egg maintains the freshness longer because of its shape. An egg is the most perfect envelope in biological nature, but no egg is perfectly symmetrical. They all bulge just slightly. Check your eggs in the morning at breakfast time. They all bulge just slightly. There's a reason for that. When a mother is incubating a child, she bulges on one side just slightly. And that bulge is very, very important. Why? Most of the components inside an egg are water, along with organic chemistry. Water. Water is designed, I have to use my hands to talk. I'm having some dental work done. So I lisp a little bit. And it's kind of interesting to listen to me lisp. But in a few weeks, if they get the work done, I won't lisp anymore. I hope, unless I get in a real habit of lisping. But I hope you can understand what I'm saying. Are you getting this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Water is designed to be off balance. It's H2O. It's designed imbalanced, and when water passes an energy gradient, whether it's electrical or thermal, when it passes an energy gradient, water is at 104.5 degree angle. It wants to be at 109. And when it passes an energy gradient, it, for a billionth of a second, I don't know how they know this, but they publish a billionth of a second, it stretches to 109 and then back to 104.5. It's like that. In the meantime, it picks up energy. That's the whole point. Got the point? Water is designed to be off balance. It is all, the molecules are always, the atoms are always falling inside the molecule. It's water. Always falling. It's always moving. That's the reason it's the universal solvent. It works. So in an egg, it is always moving internally, very gently. And if the egg bulges, it forms eddies that form clusters. Clustered water picks up energy. That's the reason an egg can remain fresh for quite a while, unless it has contamination. By the way, an egg, when laid, has a surface envelope that protects it from contaminants. First thing we do is wash it. Now contaminants can get in. So we shorten the life. Wow, we kind of mess up everything, don't we? But that's the reason these were built. Bulging like that. That means you fill them with water before you put the deck on the top. You fill them with fresh water. The water remains fresh basically through the whole year's voyage when you have something that big and the water forming that many eddies. Are you learning anything? Yes. So how did he build the ark? He built it right. Well, how do you get water during the voyage? We have calculations. Each one of those reservoirs, being 45 feet high, would hold up to 750,000 gallons of water. If the ark were filled with elephants, it was not. But if it were filled with elephants, there would be enough water to go around for the entire year of the flood. Most people say, well, for water, just pitch a bucket overside. That's what they were doing in that depiction a few slides back. No. That's contaminated water. Look, that water came from the fountains of the great deep, and it had radioactive materials in it. Later, those radioactive materials settled out. But you wouldn't want that water. It would destroy everything inside the boat. You want fresh water. Well, how do you get that full of fresh water? Oh, think a moment. No problem. Just build the ark in a vale where there's a hill nearby with a fresh spring. And build an aqueduct with a pliable curve on it so you can just, at the right time, fill it with water, put a gate in it, stop the water, and build the aqueduct around to the next and the next. Save labor. That's Occam's razor. The shortest way to get there is the best way. Got that?
Yeah.
Still awake?
Yes.
Okay, let's solve a couple more problems. Next, please. Next. And let's go fast. And next, there were baffles inside. We know because David saw next and next. Saw a small vessel that came off and next. Fitting the animals in the ark, there's room for all of them. All the basic kinds. Ventilation, no problem. Let's stop here a moment. Critics say, well, methane would have built up from the excrement. Methane would have built up. No, wait a minute. With the ark built with a window system all the way across the top, and on both sides, the louvered openings, a cubit, that's just right. Here in South Texas, you don't have any big glass factories or steel factories, or do you? Do you have any steel factories over at Freeport?
Not that.
Well, back in the East, they have these huge steel factories. And the next time you go back there, look at one of them, or a glass factory that generates a lot of internal heat inside that factory. They have window systems at the top with louvers on the side, and that causes convection, and it eliminates all the contaminants. God knew about that, so Noah built it right. Next. And next. Okay, let's deal with two more things and we can go home. Promise. One of the big problems with the ark is, what do you do with all that poop? Now, that's a big problem. First answer people give is, well, pitch it overboard. No, that's valuable. Let me show you why. The most ancient accounts we have of caging animals, accounts that go back near the time of the flood, to the ancient Chinese and Japanese, the most ancient accounts we have show that when they caged animals, they built slatted floors so that the poop wouldn't pile up. As the creature moved around, he would trample the excrement down to the next level, where they built slanted floors below that. So every few days, all you have to do is take a rake or a hoe, or delegate that, Take a rake or a hoe and just pull it down into a trough, into a channel. Now you throw it overboard. No, don't throw it overboard. That's valuable. First place, you can grow hydroponic greens down in the lower areas, the lower levels, and use that as fertilizer. But better still, introduce worms and beetles. They like that stuff. They're designed as cleanup crew. And you start with a few hundred. A few weeks later, you've got a few thousand, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of worms. What do you do with all those worms?
Fish.
What's that? Fish. Okay. No, help me out. We're almost finished.
Feed them to the chickens.
Oh, sure.
All right.
Feed them to the chickens and the birds and the raptors. Why, sure. And if you get hungry enough, no, you're not going to have to eat them yourself. When you were a kid, you probably had to eat a worm if the guy was bigger than you were. But you feed them to the birds. Sure, it's a self-sustained ecosystem. And the methane doesn't build up because you have the right ventilation system. Now, one other problem. Let's try to solve this problem, and I'll turn it back to the preacher. How do you get light down into the recesses of the ark? How do you get light down there? Ventilation's no problem. There's enough room for all the species and living systems. How do you get light? The early Chinese and Japanese learned to build paper lanterns in which they put fireflies, lightning bugs. They rest, and you pick the thing up, and they start jiggling, and you just walk down the corridors, and you've got a lantern.
Wow.
Non-combustible. But that's not all. Among those worms, you introduce glowworms that glow in the dark. And there's some insects that glow in the dark, like Rachinus coleoptera, the bombardier beetle. Others glow in the dark. And then, with the refuse as fertilizer, you grow mushrooms, and there are mushrooms that are bioluminescent. They glow in the dark. There are some extra-biblical accounts. Now, extra-biblical accounts are only as good as we can prove them to be. Only the Bible is absolutely correct. Are you with me?
Yes.
But extra-biblical accounts are very interesting sometimes. There's some extra-biblical accounts that Noah and his sons took on the ark some pretty good-sized stones that were semi-precious gemstones. We call them fluorspars. Fluorspars are rocks that have an electric matrix composition in the chemistry that if it's disturbed, they begin to glow. They effervesce. Wow. Fluorspars, you can take a stone, fluorspar stone, polish it, you can strike it, or sometimes just rub it, and it glows for 30 or 40 minutes. They found one in India that was a perfect sphere 7 feet across. And it sold for $1 billion. You can Google it. Just fluorspars, F-L-O-U-R-S-P-A-R-S. And there's a big picture of it with a few Indian girls in costumes standing around. It sold for $1 billion until they found another one just like it. So its value went down to $500 million. But between the two, they were still worth $1 billion. Fluorspars. So no problem with ventilation. No problem with what to do with the refuse. No problem with the structure and its viability as long as you put the bulkheads in there like God said to do it. We've now learned that you have to do it right. Well, God did it right, and the least we can do is follow Him the best we can. Have you learned anything?
Yes.
Have you found that the ark is viable?
Yes.
In fact, it got you here. Pastor, thank you so
Can you
much.
say something real fast about the dinosaurs?
Oh, okay. Okay. Mrs. Preacher asked if I'd say something real fast about the dinosaurs. Okay, first of all, in the pre-flood world, we learned tonight how they could exist, even with their small rib cages and small lungs. It's because of the added pressure and added oxygen ratio, but primarily the pressure. You understand that under about 22 pounds per square inch, which is what we're using in our biosphere, 22 pounds per square inch, the entire blood plasma becomes saturated with oxygen. That's how the dinosaurs could exist and proliferate. They've been found on every continent as fossils. They've been found even in Antarctica and the Arctic. They've been found on every single continent. The dinosaurs kept the vegetation in check. They were vitally important. I mentioned the Lycopsid club moss that gets 18 inches today, but before the flood, we have fossilized Lycopsid club moss. It's 120 feet tall. Something had to keep all of that in check. Otherwise, about 6 months after creation, Eve would say to Adam, "I thought you said you were going to show me the moon." He'd say, "Lady, can you climb a tree?" Unless the dinosaurs were there to keep the vegetation in check, and he could show her the moon just fine, with the vegetation in check. So, dinosaurs were on the ark. All creeping things that had breath on the ark. Dinosaurs have been found since the flood. There are a number of stories of medieval dinosaurs. We can identify the species of dinosaur. The Chinese even one family kept and bred some dinosaurs that they used to pull the royal carriage for the Emperor of China. There are dinosaur depictions in Colombia, South America. There are dinosaur depictions that are found worldwide. We have, I led 3 expeditions in the jungles of Papua New Guinea in search of living pterodactyls. Those are the cousins to the dinosaurs, the flying reptiles in the age of the dinosaurs. So they're still around. We saw some of them. We made 5 sightings, but we couldn't get close to them. Dinosaurs were on the ark. Alexander the Great saw a dinosaur in a cave in India. He went to the edge of India in his conquests. History records that he saw a dinosaur caged by them, but that dinosaur was lethargic. He couldn't break through the iron bars. Pre-flood, he could get through anything. And in Job's day, you'll find the dinosaur in Job chapter 40 called Behemoth. You'll find the Leviathan in Job 41, the fire-breathing dragon. And those are living creatures, actually living creatures. But now here's the kicker. Remnants of the dinosaurs are still around. And in the millennium, when the earth, still awake?
Yeah.
The millennium is preceded by the tribulation period.
Yeah.
In the tribulation period, late in the tribulation period, the preacher and I were talking about this at lunch today. That was a good chicken fried steak. We had some good conversation over it too. We're talking about this. Remember, the earth expanded in diameter before the flood, or after the flood. Before the flood, it was about 5% smaller in diameter. It expanded in diameter in the days of Peleg. That reduced the atmospheric pressure at sea level, and you can see from that forward the record of man's longevity declined specifically. exponentially and is now leveled off at a low level. Well, late in the tribulation period, there's going to be an earthquake such as the world has never known. It's going to actually reshape the earth. At that particular time, there are going to be such eruptions that hailstones will be generated. How heavy? How big? 100 pounds. 100-pound hailstone. How do you get a 100-pound hailstone? You have to have a lot of electrical energy with a lot of contaminants. Each of the molecules has to start with a contaminant grain. Okay, so you've got to have the contaminants go up. So in that earthquake, a lot of things will be happening in the atmosphere, but it will also be so terrible that it will reshuffle the Earth's continents. And in the millennium, Isaiah 35 states, you'll be able to walk from any spot on the globe to Jerusalem. Which means the continents will come back together. Probably not in the same configuration, but the continents will come back together. And a child, Isaiah 9 and 62 chapters, a child who has a genetic problem will still live to be 100 years of age in the millennium, and an old man will live out his days. Wow. Some people will live throughout the millennium. But the dinosaurs, Job 35, which describes that you can walk to Jerusalem, describes a person a wayfaring man. What's a wayfaring man? It's a man who prefers to walk than ride a Harley. Wow. When you walk, you generate endorphins that make you feel better. And if your health is good enough, that's a lot more fun than riding a Harley, I think. Okay, guys. Your Harleys or your Jeeps or Navigators or whatever. You praying for me a new Navigator? Would you join me in prayer for that? One of these, mine's going to run from now. It's already gone 400,000 miles. It's going to keep going. Okay. All right. So, a wayfaring man will walk. A person who wants to go up to see the king. Who's going to be ruling in Jerusalem?
Jesus.
Jesus. So if you want to go see him in the flesh, walk. Wow. But that same chapter describes tanin in the Hebrew that you're studying. That's the basic word for dinosaur. Describes the dinosaurs as proliferating in the millennium. Well, how can the dinosaurs proliferate and get a pretty good sized population again? Because the atmospheric pressure and the oxygen ratio will be higher and the deep cell tissue will be satisfied. Getting all this? So why are we going to need, one question begs another. Why are we going to need dinosaurs in the millennium? Oh, haven't you read where the desert's going to blossom like a rose? And there's going to be so much vegetation. We don't have enough John Deere tractors to mow it down. We're going to need the dinosaurs. And besides, God likes toys too.